Welcome and thank you for tuning into this episode of Evidently You're Unaware. I am your host, Andrea, also known as the Successful Diva, and I am here today with some special news, but also a special guest, and I'm excited for that. The information provided on this platform is designed to elevate your awareness and your consciousness. I don't want to bring some of this information just into your peripheral view. I aim to bring it into your central vision. These are things that you may or may not be discussing in your circles of influence, but it is time to become aware because we can no longer live in ignorance. There is a moment in time where all the decisions that we make they have consequences. And so I am here to bring that to the light. So without further ado, let's get smarter today. We live in the United States of America, and we all have our residence in a respective community, a city, a state, all of those things. If you're here in the United States, we take residence in one or more of those platforms. And so when we're there, or as we live, we are all governed by laws. These are the laws that help shape how we behave. And without that shape and those behaviors that are monitored by those laws, there can become penalties associated with it. And so when we break those laws, there can be fines, there can be imprisonment, there can be worse in some states. But nonetheless, these laws are applicable to you, to me, to our family, our neighbors, our coworkers, our business associates. You get my point. I believe you understand. All means all. And since some of those neighbors, coworkers, etc., could have been or could be our elected leaders, they too fall in the all category. Yes, even those that are fortunate to attain the highest office in the land, commonly known as the president, he too, she too, are believed to be in the all. Then something happens. And what happens challenges our understanding and our learning of what we attained about those laws and how penalties seem to apply to some, but not others. And what we encounter is unbridled lawlessness. Yes. What we are witnessing in our country today could be called unbridled lawlessness. It is the antithesis of abiding by the rules governing our conduct. What makes unbridled lawlessness worse is when an individual warps the minds of the groups of people into believing that laws should no longer serve as guardrails for order and living harmoniously with others. The 47th President of the United States of America and his administration, in essence, are giving us a picture of what unbridled lawlessness looks like. Some may disagree. Some, in fact, I believe do disagree. But what could possibly explain the blatant disregard for the Constitution and the rule of law enacted by some members of our Congress? Well, I'm glad to say that my guest, Ramsay McLauchlan, will help me contextualize history and what we are witnessing today. Ramsay is a local resident here in our area. He started his political involvement in New Hampshire, where when he was 13, volunteering for the Sargent Shriver presidential campaign. While in New Hampshire, he served as the executive director of the New Hampshire Democratic Party. In addition to working professionally and volunteering on dozens of campaigns, he worked for Dick Swett, a Democratic congressman from New Hampshire. Ramsay has also served in public office on the city council and school boards for Nashua, or in Nashua, New Hampshire. Since moving to Florida in 2003, he has been actively involved in local and state politics, including serving as the chair of the Pinellas County Democratic Party. Welcome, Ramsay. How are you today? Thank you for being my guest on Evidently You're Unaware.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's always good to be in a position to talk to people about what really matters and important out there, not just the politics, but really, as you alluded to, the kind of sense of how our community even works. And I think we'll get into some of these aspects, but as you were saying, is if some people don't have to abide by the rules and other people do, you get into a really bad situation, and it needs to be fixed.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to take us back a little bit as we head into this first question for you. Now, I'm young enough to remember the 2016 campaign. I voted in it in the election. And I am going to tell a little secret here. I went to bed because I thought at a certain point of the night, Hillary had won. I thought the electoral count had reached a point where she won. And I went to sleep. And I think history has shown us that when we all rose the next morning, something quite different had happened. So I'm going to ask you, because I know I was totally not prepared for that. What was your personal experience? And that will help us transition, I think, into kind of where we are in this 47th presidential term. But what was your experience at that time, then becoming the 45th president of the United States?
Well, I think throughout that election, there were a lot of people who just didn't think that what was happening was okay, and was thinking the voters were going to reject that, right? And that goes back to the basic Republican primary, right? When Donald Trump was running in the Republican primary, the Republican opponents thought that, here he is calling Marco Rubio Little Marco, right? I mean, just kind of the bullying, the insulting, the kind of diminishment of the whole thing. And the Republicans thought this isn't okay, but this won't last, right? And so I think there were a lot of people on both sides who were taken aback, not just at the election result, final result, but through the whole process of how Donald Trump decided that he would just be insulting. He would not, he acted in a way that if my daughter acted towards somebody, I would have been very upset, right? I mean, this is not just political. This is like very much, why would you act that way? And so I think there is some disbelief, not only that I had, that a lot of people had, right? If you remember, Donald Trump was one of the leading people that was talking about how Barack Obama was born in Kenya, right? And it was like this incredibly racist thing, but it also was so stupid that people were, what?
How?
Right?
Right.
Argue with that nonsense, right? And it's amazing how throughout the 2016 campaign and afterwards, people who still believe that he was born in Kenya, right? And it was kind of a huge disbelief. So certainly, I, like many people, thought Hillary was going to win. I had some concerns about things, as an example, again, not to get into all the nitty gritty, but the Democrat in Wisconsin who was running for U.S. Senate was losing. And I was thinking that person was more popular in Wisconsin than Hillary. So
Right.
how? Right. So I think there were certainly signs there to believe that she could lose. But in the back of my mind, in a lot of people's mind, how is it okay for this to be happening, right? And it's not a political, liberal, conservative thing. It's is this okay? And so I was surprised.
Yeah. Yeah, I think our sentiment is still probably the sentiment of many at this point, and here we are, and he's back. So that will lead me to this question: because with your background being history, what, if any, has there been any historical comparison? We know that, at least I should say, in my lifetime, I've never seen anything like it. So I don't have really much that I could have even read about historically that this compares to.
If I was to find a comparison, and again, I would have to look more deeply to make this as a truly good academic argument. But if I was going to compare it to any election, I might say Andrew Jackson. And the reason for that was, before Andrew Jackson ran for president, it was very much and again, anybody who in my history and my civics class know, at this time, the only people who could vote were white men, right? But at the time of Andrew Jackson, he broadened the white man who could vote, right? You didn't have to own land anymore. They weren't necessarily educated. So Andrew Jackson got many more kind of working class people to vote, right? It was very much a populist movement, in the same way that Donald Trump has tied into the angst and fear of the, I say, average person. That is something that Jackson did. And I think that is probably, if one was to look at the mistakes that Democrats have made from 2016 till today, the one that they really should have, and I think they are starting to get to, is to stop and listen to the anxiety and the problems of people. Whether you agree it's a legitimate problem or not, it is for them, right?
Yeah.
And so when somebody complains about something and you're like, that's not an issue. I mean, there was a famous thing where Michael Dukakis was running for president in 1988, and we were having some farmers trying to figure out what they were doing, and corn prices were down, and he was trying to convince them to grow, and I think it was endives. I don't remember what it was. And these farmers were like, what are you talking about, you guy from Massachusetts, non-farmer guy, right? And I think even if that was the right answer, I don't know that it was, these people are like, who are you and what are you talking about, right? When gas prices were going up and some Democrats were saying, well, that's why we need electric cars. Well, the guy who is barely able to afford the gas in his truck to go to work every day is not looking to buy a new vehicle, right?
Nope.
So,
and certainly not electric.
Exactly. You know, so I think one of the things that Donald Trump has tied into is this populist movement, this anger, right? And when people are angry, they're willing to throw out everybody in charge, right? They weren't, some were anti-Democrat and some remain that way, but they're just anti-Washington, anti what's happening. They're frustrated. I mean, and again, I would never try to kind of understand universes that I don't belong to, but one of the things I've noticed in terms of the African-American community, where there were, and mainly Black men, but some Black women, who weren't necessarily fans of Donald Trump, but they were frustrated with what things were going on, right?
Right.
And so the idea that, sure, in many ways they felt, I say, more at home with democratic policies and principles and stuff, still wasn't working for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there were, and we saw that in the election, a higher percentage of minority voters voting for Republicans this time, because, again, not that they were super excited about the Republican message, other than they were frustrated where we are right now. And until Democrats can address that problem, we're going to continue this kind of cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Andrew Jackson. Well, there's a little historical note that we all need to go research a little bit more on. I will do that because, when we're thinking of history, I think I was always taught to use history as the lesson so that you don't repeat what happened, especially if it were bad. And so there we have to learn and remember that there are things that people wanted and needed back then. That's still the case today.
Absolutely.
We've just got more people in the United States that want and need.
And the needs change, and the needs in different communities change. What's important to one group of individuals isn't necessarily important to other people. But we share some pretty basic stuff, right? We want, number one, our friends and families to be safe. We want to live in an environment where, we have food and shelter and a certain ability to have a sense that the future holds possibilities, not just angst and problems, right? And I think that the Democrats need, again, and some of this is happening now, is they need to kind of step back and listen more and understand that before we bring the solution, let's make sure we're working on the right problem, right? What is it that people truly want? And that is part of it.